Hey there! If you're just getting into UI UX design, let me tell you, this video is one you really don't want to skip. Sure, you'll see me designing a section live in Figma, and that's cool on its own. But there's more going on here. While I'm designing, you'll also hear a podcast I've added right on top of this video. And it's all about something that can make or break your entire design: typography. This isn't just about picking a nice font. Typography affects readability, accessibility, the whole vibe of your product, and even how users trust a brand. It's a big deal, and the podcast breaks it all down in a super chill, beginner-friendly way. So yeah, you're not just watching a design get built, you're learning why these choices matter. Stick around, turn up the volume, and by the end of this video, you'll not only walk away with a cool Figma section to try, but you'll also understand why typography is one of the most powerful tools in your design toolkit.
Hey there, welcome to the Deep Dive.
Hey.
Today we're diving into something that's, well, absolutely fundamental to your online experience, even if you don't always consciously notice it: typography in UI design.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
And we're talking about more than just, picking pretty fonts.
Oh, much more.
Typography is that crucial bridge between how a digital interface looks and how well it actually works for you. It's key to guiding your eye, helping you find information fast, and honestly, just making the whole experience feel right.
And to get a handle on this, we've pulled together quite a bit of material articles, some really lively Reddit discussions, research findings.
The real mix.
Yeah, we've got insights covering the core principles, the common pitfalls designers fall into, a look ahead at trends for 2025, and even some academic takes on web readability.
So our mission in this deep dive is basically to distill the most important actionable bits from all these sources. We want to help you navigate the world of UI typography, understand why it matters so much, and maybe even spot it, out in the wild afterwards.
Definitely.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
So let's kick things off with the absolute basics. What are we even talking about here? What is typography in the UI context?
Fundamentally, it's the craft, the art and process, really, of arranging text.
Arranging it how?
Arranging it to make it readable, visually appealing, and crucially effective for communication on screen.
Okay. Readable, appealing, effective.
Exactly. And a really foundational distinction, something our sources highlight right away, is the difference between a typeface and a font.
Ah, yes. People mix these up all the time.
They do. So I think of a typeface as the design family, the overall look, like, say, Arial or Helvetica.
The brand name, almost.
Kind of, yeah. And then a font is a specific member of that family, Arial Bold at 14 pixels, for instance, the specific file or variation.
Gotcha. So Arial is the typeface, Arial Bold 14px is the font.
You got it. And that choice of typeface itself sets a huge tone.
How so?
Well, serif typefaces. You know, the ones with the little decorative strokes on the letters.
Like Times New Roman.
Exactly. They often feel more traditional, maybe more formal, while sans serif fonts, the ones without those strokes.
Like Arial, or the one this website uses.
Right. They tend to read as more modern, clean, often considered easier on the eyes for longer reading on screens, too. That choice really shapes a brand's digital voice.
Okay, so typeface choice sets the mood. But it's not just the typeface, right? You said arranging text.
Oh, definitely not. It's everything around the text, too, like hierarchy and scale.
Yeah.
Using different sizes, different weights like bold or light, and maybe different styles like italics to show what's most important.
So a big, bold headline grabs your attention.
Precisely. And then smaller body text guides you through the details. It creates a path for your eye.
Makes sense. What else?
Then there's color and contrast. Color can add mood, sure, and highlight specific info.
But contrast.
Contrast is non-negotiable, especially for readability and critically accessibility. Good contrast isn't just a nice-to-have feature.
No, it's essential so everyone can actually read the text comfortably.
Exactly. And then there's the often overlooked power of white space and layout.
The empty space.
Yep, what designers call negative space. But it's incredibly positive for readability.
How does that work?
It separates elements, reduces that feeling of clutter, and just lets the text breathe. Details like the space between lines of text, that's called leading,
Leading, okay.
and the padding, the margins around blocks of text, they make a huge difference in visual comfort. Less strain on the eyes.
So it's not just the letters, it's the space between them, the space between lines, the space around paragraphs.
All of it. And what's fascinating here is how these seemingly tiny details, the specific space between two letters, the distance between lines, the choice between two very similar sans serifs, they all have to work together.
Like an orchestra.
Kind of. When done well, they create this sense of order and ease. It's the difference between a website that feels calm and organized and one that just feels, like a shouting match of information.
Right. It feels effortless when it's done well, even though a lot of effort went in.
Precisely.
Speaking of ease, let's tackle two terms that sources say get confused a lot. Legibility versus readability.
Ah, yes. Foundational.
Do you, listening right now, know the difference? It might seem subtle, but it's actually critical in UI.
They really are. So legibility, that's about how easily you can recognize and distinguish individual characters.
Like telling an I from an L.
Exactly, or a C from an O. It's mostly down to the typeface's design itself, the shape of the letters, their distinctiveness, the spacing within the letters. Crucial for scanning and quick recognition, like reading a sign quickly.
Okay, so legibility is about seeing the letters clearly. What about readability?
Readability is about how easily you can read and comprehend blocks of text. Longer passages.
So reading an article, not just a button label.
Right. This is influenced more by the layout, how long are the lines of text, too long is tiring. Is the line spacing, that leading we mentioned, comfortable? How are paragraphs organized? This is key for digesting content.
So you need both. A font could be super legible, each letter distinct, but if the lines are too long and spacing is bad, the readability is terrible.
Spot on. Both are vital for a functional interface. You can't really have one without the other being considered.
And making sure text is both legible and readable gets, well, complicated fast when you think about all the different screens people use these days. Phones, tablets, desktops, huge monitors.
Oh, absolutely. Which brings us right to the crucial concept of responsive typography.
Making text respond to the screen size.
Exactly. Responsive typography means the text size and its surrounding properties, things like line height or letter spacing, need to adapt automatically based on the size of your screen.
So it looks good and reads well everywhere.
That's the goal. Whether you're on a tiny phone or a massive desktop monitor, the text should remain comfortable to read, legible, and functional.
How do designers actually achieve that?
Well, a key technique, technically speaking, is using relative units in the code. Things like Ms or Rems or viewport units like VW and VH.
Instead of just saying 14 pixels.
Right. Because pixels are fixed, these relative units scale based on other text sizes or the size of the screen itself. This allows the typography to kind of flow and adjust much more naturally.
Fluid scaling.
Yeah. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this adaptability isn't just like a nice feature anymore. It's essential for reaching users wherever they are, on whatever device they happen to be using.
It's table stakes now.
Pretty much.
And for the technically minded listening, developers often achieve that using something called media queries in the website's code, the CSS.
Correct. Those basically tell the browser, okay, if the screen is this wide, use these specific typography settings. Allows for fine-tuning at different breakpoints.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, based on the source material, especially that Reddit discussion we looked at.
Ah, the great debate.
Yes. We run into a bit of a paradox. Accessibility guidelines like the WCAG or standards for government digital interfaces, like the US government system. They often recommend a minimum of 16 pixels for body text size.
That's a common recommendation, yeah.
For good reason.
And yet, you look at some of the biggest, most widely used websites in the world, Google, Reddit itself, Wikipedia, parts of Amazon, Apple.
You see smaller text.
You often see body text set at 14 pixels, sometimes even 12 pixels. So what gives? Why the disconnect? It seems like a direct contradiction.
It's a really fascinating debate, and the sources showed strong opinions on both sides. The arguments for 16 pixels are solid.
What are they?
Well, it's a clear guideline aimed squarely at ensuring readability for the widest possible range of users, including people with mild visual impairments. It provides a strong, accessible default size that generally scales well. And as you said, the official US government design system does use 16px as its base.
So accessibility and a good default. Makes sense. But then you have the counter arguments. particularly coming from designers who work on, say, very data-heavy interfaces, complex dashboards, things like that.
What do they argue?
They argue that 16px can simply take up too much screen real estate or just look too big and maybe a bit clunky in certain contexts. There's an aesthetic preference sometimes for slightly smaller, denser text.
And is 16px a hard rule?
Well, that's another point. While it's a strong recommendation for accessibility, it's not always a universally codified requirement in the same way that, say, color contrast ratios are in WCAG level AA. It's more of a guideline.
Okay, so space, aesthetics, and it being a recommendation, not a strict rule.
And critically, something that Reddit thread really hammered home is that the actual legibility at smaller sizes depends heavily on other factors beyond just the pixel count.
Like what?
Things like the font's own design, specifically its X height. Yeah, that's literally the height of the lowercase x in that typeface. Fonts with relatively tall X heights, think of Apple's San Francisco or Arial, Microsoft's Sego UI, these can remain surprisingly legible even at 12 or 14 pixels.
Because the main body of the lowercase letters is bigger relative to the ascenders and descenders.
Exactly. So they feel bigger and clearer even at the same pixel size. Plus screen quality, high-resolution displays, how the font actually renders on different operating systems. All that matters too. A font might look okay at 14px on a Mac, but less sharp on a Windows machine.
Wow, okay, so it's way more nuanced than just 16px or bust.
It really is. The core insight seems to be that while 16 pixels is a fantastic, safe, accessible default starting point,
Good place to begin.
it's not a rigid one-size-fits-all rule for every single context. Designers are constantly doing this balancing act.
Balancing what?
Balancing that accessibility recommendation against aesthetics, the need to fit information efficiently on the screen, and the specific characteristics of the typeface they've chosen. It's a nuanced challenge, not just checking a box.
Which does raise that big question. How do designers make that final call when the guidelines seem to clash with practical needs or even user preferences for denser info?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It often comes down to context, testing, and understanding the specific users.
Okay, so we've covered the building blocks and that really interesting 16px debate. Now let's talk about where things often go wrong. The dark side.
The pitfalls, yes.
Our sources list a whole minefield of common typography mistakes, things designers do that hurt the user experience. Avoiding these seems like low-hanging fruit to immediately elevate a design.
Absolutely. Let's group some of the big ones we saw mentioned repeatedly. First up, inconsistency.
How so?
If your spacing, your text sizes, or even which specific fonts or weights you're using, if they jump around randomly from page to page, or even element to element on the same page,
It feels messy.
it immediately makes a design feel sloppy, unprofessional, and frankly, harder to use because the patterns aren't predictable.
Okay, consistency is key. What's next?
Another huge area is choosing the wrong fonts.
Yeah.
And this isn't just about picking a font someone personally finds ugly, though that happens.
Subjectivity.
Right. But more objectively, it's about using, say, overly decorative or cheesy display fonts for paragraphs of body text, where something neutral and readable is usually much better.
Makes sense.
Or choosing typefaces whose personalities clash, like a very formal serif paired with a super playful script. It sends mixed signals.
Or the opposite problem.
Exactly. Pairing two fonts that are too similar, like two plain sans serifs. It doesn't create contrast. It just looks like you made a mistake.
Ah, okay. Didn't think of that one.
And a really common one, just using too many different typefaces or styles on one site. Often, one or two well-chosen typefaces used consistently with good hierarchy are more than enough. Keep it simple.
Less is more. Got it. You also mentioned using a font in the wrong way.
Yes, like using a display typeface again, those fonts designed specifically to be big and eye-catching for headlines and trying to use it for small body text.
Why is that bad?
They simply aren't designed for it. The details that make them interesting large often make them muddled and hard to read when shrunk down. Legibility tanks.
Okay, use fonts for their intended purpose.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
What else trips people up?
Then there's abusing styling. This one drives designers crazy.
Uh-oh. Like what?
Just because you can make text bold, italic, underlined, maybe a different color all at the same time,
Doesn't mean you should.
please don't. The sources really emphasize that less is more with styling. Use emphasis sparingly and purposefully. Pick one method, usually.
Good advice.
Also, a subtle one. Watch out for using faux or obliques, where the browser just artificially slants the regular font instead of a true italic version of the font, which was specifically designed by the typographer to slant gracefully.
Is there a visible difference?
Often, yes. True italics generally look better and read more comfortably. Another styling trap. Using font weights that are too light, they might look elegant in a design mock-up.
But on a real screen,
They can just disappear, especially against complex backgrounds or for users with less than perfect vision. You need sufficient contrast and substance.
okay, don't overstyle. Use true italics, avoid super lightweights. What about spacing?
Huge category. We see a lot of spacing and layout errors. This includes things like not enough letter spacing, especially in all caps text or with certain display styles. It can really hurt legibility.
These feel cramped.
Exactly. Or using typefaces that are way too condensed or too extended. They can be hard to read and often scale poorly. Incorrect line spacing, that leading again.
Too tight or too loose?
Both can be bad. Too tight feels dense and intimidating. Too loose makes it hard for the eye to track back to the next line. Also, not enough space between paragraphs, it creates a wall of text.
Yikes.
And then just little things that add up. Sloppy punctuation, using hyphens instead of proper M or N dashes, awkward line breaks right in the middle of phrases. It all disrupts the reading flow. Basically, any text that feels cramped, crowded, or misaligned is fighting against the user.
It needs breathing room.
Desperately. And finally, a critical mistake, especially in UI development, lack of testing.
How so?
A typeface can look absolutely gorgeous in Figma or Sketch, your design tool,
Pixel perfect.
but then you put it in a real web browser, maybe on a different operating system like Windows, which renders fonts differently than macOS.
And it looks terrible.
It can. Custom web fonts in particular can sometimes have rendering glitches or look fuzzy. You absolutely must test your typography choices on real devices, in different browsers, on different OCs.
You know, I saw a site just recently where the line spacing was so incredibly tight on my phone screen, it felt like the words were literally piled on top of each other. It instantly made me want to leave. It's so clear avoiding these mistakes isn't just about making things look pretty. It directly impacts how usable and, frankly, pleasant an interface feels. Get this wrong, and you frustrate your users fast.
No question. Form follows function, and typography is where they meet head-on.
Okay, so we know the principles, we know the pitfalls. Let's look ahead now. What's exciting and new in the world of UI typography?
Yeah, what's coming next?
What are designers exploring and what trends are shaping things for, say, 2025 and beyond? The sources point to some really interesting directions.
A big one, technically speaking, is the rise of variable fonts.
Variable, meaning?
This is a significant leap in font technology. Instead of needing separate font files for light, regular, bold, condensed, extended, etc.
All those different files you download.
Right. Variable fonts can pack potentially thousands of those variations, weight, width, slant, sometimes even optical size, into a single compact file.
Wow. How did that help?
It gives designers incredible flexibility to fine-tune the typography on the fly. You can adjust the weight subtly for different screen sizes, or make text slightly narrower to fit in a tight space, all from one font file. Allows for really granular control and consistent readability across devices.
That sounds powerful. Less to load, too.
Much less. We're also seeing trends like layered text, using multiple weights or styles overlaid for a sense of visual depth.
Interesting effect.
And definitely a move towards bold colors paired with bold typography, making a strong, confident brand statement.
Standing out.
Exactly. One source we looked at even cited a stat suggesting around 70% of users respond positively to bolder text, perceiving it as conveying confidence and energy.
But you still have to use it wisely, right? Not everywhere.
Oh, absolutely, judiciously, like we said about overstyling. But using bold strategically seems to be trending.
What else?
The minimalist approach is definitely still popular and probably always will be in some form. That idea that clarity often comes from simplicity, less visual noise.
Makes sense for complex interfaces.
Definitely. And, browsing the comment sections of some articles, people were having fun speculating about maybe more experimental trends bubbling up.
Like what?
Things like subtle text gradients, maybe touches of 3D effects on type, more expressive handwritten or script styles finding their way into UI, bringing monospace fonts, like coding fonts, into mainstream design for a certain aesthetic. Even more sophisticated text animation, and inevitably, more integration of emojis as actual design elements within interfaces.
Emojis taking over. Those are fun to think about. What about more subtle, advanced techniques that are maybe less trendy, but more about refinement?
Yeah, that gets into what's called microtypography.
Micro. So tiny details.
Exactly. This is the real craft, the art of fine-tuning the tiny stuff. Things like kerning,
the space between specific letter pairs, right? Like A and V.
Correct. Adjusting that space just right. And tracking, which is the overall spacing across a whole block of text, plus refining the leading, the line spacing very precisely.
Ligatures, too.
Yep, using ligatures where certain letter pairs like F and I are joined into a single, smoother character.
Yeah.
Mastering these small adjustments, it really enhances the reading experience at a subconscious level, gives a design that polished, professional feel.
It's the difference between off the rack and tailored.
Good analogy. Designers are also increasingly incorporating motion and micro interactions with text.
How so?
Well, imagine text that slightly enlarges or changes color when you hover over it, confirming it's a link or button. Or maybe animated messages while something is loading, instead of just a static loading. Or smooth transitions when text elements appear or disappear.
Subtle feedback.
Exactly. It adds this layer of subtle feedback, guides the user's attention, and just makes the interface feel more alive and responsive.
And then there's the whole psychological aspect you touched on earlier.
Right, the fascinating area of emotion through typography. How does a typeface actually make you feel?
Can it really do that?
Absolutely. We mentioned the serif versus sans serif perception that ANU study finding serifs often read as more trustworthy or traditional, while sans serifs feel more modern, approachable, energetic, maybe resonating better with younger audiences.
Oh.
So the font choice, combined with color and styling, isn't just functional, it's actively shaping brand perception and emotional response.
That's deep. So how do you pull all this together? The trends, the micro details, the emotion?
Well, it really comes down to rigorous testing in context. You can't just design in a vacuum.
What kind of testing?
Checking how typefaces perform in less than ideal conditions. Maybe simulating low light, looking at them on screens with different resolutions. And critically, getting feedback from actual users. Do they find it readable? Does it feel right?
Tools can help here too, right?
Definitely. Using automated contrast analyzers tools like WebAIM's Checker, or some design tools like Figma or Sketch have plugins or built-in features. Those are great for catching contrast issues quickly. And using browser developer tools lets you tweak and test typography live on a web page.
Experimenting in real time.
Yeah. And for larger teams or products, using established design systems is key to ensuring all these carefully considered typography standards. The font choices, sizes, spacing rules are applied consistently everywhere.
Keeps everyone on the same page, literally.
Exactly.
So as we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's circle back to the core purpose behind all this careful consideration of fonts and spacing and everything. Yeah, the why. It's all about enhancing the user experience and, crucially, making interfaces truly accessible to everyone.
Couldn't agree more. The sources really stress that accessibility isn't like an optional add-on, it's fundamental.
And typography is a huge part of that.
A massive part. Adhering to standards like WCAG, ensuring those sufficient contrast ratios we mentioned, at least 4.5.1 for normal text, 3.1 for large text against the background.
Gotta meet those numbers.
And making sure the entire interface, especially the text, remains functional and readable when users need to zoom in. Maybe up to 200%, that's foundational.
What about specific user needs?
Well, there are also specific typography considerations for users with, say, dyslexia or other visual impairments. This often involves choosing highly readable sans serif fonts known to be easier for dyslexic users, providing generous spacing between letters and lines, always maintaining strong contrast, and absolutely ensuring that users can resize the text in their browser or OS settings without breaking the layout.
Giving users control.
Exactly. And again, tools can help. Automated accessibility checkers like WayEE or NDI are incredibly useful here.
How do they help?
They can quickly scan a web page and flag potential accessibility issues related to typography. Things like insufficient contrast, maybe text that's too small, improper spacing, or even problems with the heading structure and hierarchy. Helps catch things you might miss.
Super useful. So the big picture here, the main takeaway seems crystal clear. Typography isn't just, a minor visual detail.
Far from it.
It's a fundamental design element that profoundly impacts how you, the user, interact with, perceive, and ultimately understand digital content. It's actively guiding your navigation, it's influencing whether you stay engaged or bounce off, and it's building trust or, unfortunately, sometimes breaking it in the website or app you're using.
Absolutely. By understanding these principles we've talked about, mastering those building blocks, and diligently avoiding those common mistakes,
The pitfalls.
designers can craft digital experiences that aren't just nice to look at, but are genuinely seamless, truly inclusive, and effective for everyone. It's really about making the words on the screen work as hard as possible for the user.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of this deep dive into the world of UI typography.
Covered a lot of ground.
We did. It's pretty wild, actually, when you stop and think about the layers of intentional design or sometimes unintentional mistakes that go into the text we look at on screens all day, every single day.
Hopefully this gives you, our listener, a new lens to look through. Next time you're browsing a website or using an app, maybe you'll start spotting the deliberate typography choices, seeing the hierarchy, noticing the spacing, appreciating a well-chosen font pair, or maybe even spotting some of those common pitfalls we discussed.
Become a typography detective.
Why not? It's everywhere.
Okay, so to leave you with a final thought to cut on, how does the typography of your favorite website or app, the one you use all the time, how does it subtly influence how you feel about it and how you use it, perhaps in ways you've never even consciously noticed until now?
Something to think about.